She wore my system like a borrowed dress. Pretty on her, but it didn't fit. Not really. Not when she stuttered through the fourth bullet point, mispronouncing telemetry like she'd only read it off a whiteboard 5 minutes ago. I could tell the moment the military liaison on stage blinked, confused, waiting for her to explain the fail-safe protocol. She skipped it. Of course she did. Because the only one who knew what would happen if the fail-safe failed was standing on the other side of the glass wall, in flats and a wrinkled blazer, clutching a badge with a misspelled last name. "Sorry," the PR girl muttered again. Her cheeks flushed, eyes fixed on the phone. "It says your access is limited to attendee only. No room access." My name wasn't just missing. It had been scrubbed. If you're still listening, pause for a second. Hit subscribe, hit like. You have no idea how much it matters to the folks who build these stories for you. We put in real time, real heart. Thank you. I stepped back from the glass. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I'd worn the wrong shoes anyway, blisters already forming. But I did pull out my phone, opened my encrypted folder, and typed one line into an email draft so fast it felt like muscle memory. Breach of attribution, clause 14C, per initial licensing terms. Freeze request initiated. To my attorney. CC DoD contact. Attachments, time-stamped schema logs, signed contract addendum, embedded API signature log. Subject, urgent, IP control enforcement. Then I hit send. See, 3 years ago, I built what they're calling VectorNav OS, not on a W-2, not on company time. I did it on a folding table in a rented garage between contract jobs while the power flickered and my space heater buzzed like it was debating combustion. Back then, Armitage didn't even have a real R&D wing, just a procurement graveyard and a handful of engineers they didn't know what to do with. So they paid me as a consultant through my LLC. Standard gig, no benefits, no guarantees, just invoice and survive. But I'd read the clause. Hell, I'd written the clause. Buried in a contributor appendix only 3 people ever opened. It stated that if public credit for the IP was misassigned, full rights reverted to the original holding entity. The holding entity was mine. I didn't list myself. I listed Helion Vector Systems, technically a shell until today. Inside the ballroom, applause broke out. They'd just announced Alyssa as the project lead and innovation architect. There was champagne. A military general clapped her on the shoulder. She smiled like she'd built Rome from silicon. She hadn't even installed the first version correctly. I turned and walked out. Past the linen-draped registration tables, past the elevators. Outside, the December air snapped at my skin like dry ice. My Uber driver pulled up, startled when I climbed in early. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Everything's just beginning," I said. I opened my laptop on the ride back, logged into the sandbox, accessed the override panel. My token was still live. Top-level credential, unexpired. I hit revoke. 1 second later, every secure test environment connected to VectorNav OS began a silent countdown. No alarms, no pop-ups, just entropy and silence. 3 years ago, there was no stage, no spotlight, no Armitage conference badges. Just 4 folding chairs, a whiteboard peeling at the corners, and a shared coffee maker that coughed more than it brewed. We were procurement R&D, which was corporate code for the forgotten floor. Half the fluorescent lights were dead, the thermostat was ornamental, and no one visited unless they were lost or desperate. That's where VectorNav began. On a Tuesday, after I'd just finished an exhausting run of contract work for a medical logistics firm and had exactly $26 in my business account. My LLC, Catalyst Orion, was how I paid rent. So when the offer came from Armitage to consult on sensor integration frameworks, I said yes before asking who else was on the team. The answer was no one. Not yet. Alyssa Greer wasn't in the picture back then. Just a few procurement liaisons, a stressed-out systems manager named Rico, and a hallway full of dying routers. They gave me access, told me to just prototype something for autonomous grid redundancy, and left me alone for 6 weeks, which was the best gift they could have given me. Because with no oversight and no legacy code to babysit, I started from scratch. I pulled from older telemetry algorithms I'd built under Catalyst Orion. I drafted a new modular stack with interchangeable logic nodes. No plug-and-play garbage, no vendor lock-in. It worked across drone platforms, satellite pings, field equipment, anything that ran basic edge computing. I didn't even name it at first. I just labeled the folder VNavOS 0.1 and kept pushing commits. But I also kept every log, every email, every schema export. And when they asked to roll it in to internal systems, I agreed, but only after inserting one clause into the contributor license agreement, Clause 14C, tucked between a boilerplate indemnity section and a subsection on third-party audits. The clause was simple. In the event of public misattribution of authorship or technical architecture, all derivative rights revert to the originating entity. They signed it without question. Why would they? Back then, I wasn't even allowed in most investor meetings. Alyssa hadn't been hired yet. Legal barely skimmed contractor docs. I was just the ghost in the server closet who made things work. But I also filed a provisional patent, not in my name, but through a dormant holding entity I controlled, called Helion Vector Systems. I'd set it up years prior, back when I thought I'd launch my own product line. It had just been sitting there, quietly renewed, quietly forgotten, until that day in the ballroom. Alyssa had no clue any of this existed. She assumed, like most execs do, that the work was already owned, that the diagrams in her slides were corporate property, that I was just one more coder with an inflated opinion of my own importance. She didn't realize the API keys she bragged about in her pitch were still routed through Catalyst Orion's license, or that the operating layer still pinged verification tokens that reported to a private key vault I controlled. That's the thing about attribution. When it's right, nobody notices. When it's wrong, everything starts to break. By the time Alyssa stood on that stage grinning for the cameras, the countdown had already started. Not just on the system, but on the story she'd built around herself. She stole credit. I wrote the contract. I didn't slam doors or call emergency meetings or drag anyone into a confrontation. They'd just spin against me. Let Alyssa have her stage. Let the board post congratulatory nonsense on LinkedIn and pat her on the back with their $2,000 suits and clueless smiles. Let her walk off stage like the queen of modular telemetry, because I didn't need a mic. I had the claws. Back at my apartment, a third-floor walk-up in Arlington, still half-furnished because I never stayed long enough to make it feel permanent. I locked the door, kicked off my shoes, and powered up my old ThinkPad. Not the work-issued one. Not the one with Armitage's bloated antivirus bloatware and fake admin rights. This was mine, air-gapped for years, used only for 3 things: contract backups, legal templates, and kill switches. I opened the encrypted folder. Label: VNav control root. Inside, clause files, signed contributor agreements, logs of every schema upload tied to my Catalyst Orion account. I checked the timestamps again, even though I'd done it 10,000 times before. Still airtight. Then I opened my email client and typed 2 names from memory. First, Len Tobias, my IP attorney, the man once described by a judge as annoyingly thorough. Second, RM, Mac Kessler, Department of Defense Liaison for Systems Integrity Procurement. We'd crossed paths during a vendor neutralization sprint last year when I quietly helped patch a system another contractor tried to pass off as secure. Subject: Attribution Clause Breach. Immediate attention required. Body: Dear Len, Mac. Please see attached documentation regarding misattribution of proprietary modular telemetry framework currently in use by Armitage Systems under the VectorNav OS platform. Clause 14C of the contributor agreement has been triggered by public misassignment of authorship. As of now, all license grants are suspended, effective immediately, pending audit. Additionally, I am initiating a full usage freeze on the modules originating from Catalyst Orion's IP base, as outlined in the original agreement. Attachments: Clause 14C reversion, .signed.pdf, API auth log snapshot, attribution timeline, .xlsic, patent filing it provisional Helion vector, PDF token override JSON no threats, no emotion, just documentation, just truth. Then I accessed the secure dev panel, authenticated using my Catalyst Orion private key, and revoked the master token, one that had been quietly validating every instance of the telemetry sandbox since launch. It wasn't something Alyssa even knew existed. She'd handed off credential setup during onboarding, like most people do when they don't understand what they're working with. In the logs, a quiet line appeared. Token Catalyst Master Dev Arrow1 revoked. Status, replication queued, 48H rollout. That meant the heartbeat sync to Armitage's dev environments would silently begin to fail after 2 days. Not a crash, not a breach, just a slow drift into error. Test results would become inconsistent. Simulations wouldn't replicate. Drones in validation would misread fallback parameters, and all of it would look, at first, like standard QA noise. That was the point. Make them ask the question, why isn't it working? So I closed the laptop. Didn't even watch TV, just made a cup of tea and sat by the window watching the city lights blink like nothing had changed. Because they hadn't. Not yet. But the clause had been triggered, and clauses, especially the kind people forget they've signed, have a way of rewriting everything. Quietly, legally, completely. The first sign was a checksum failure during a live demo in Houston. A field rep was walking through a simulation for a mid-tier logistics contractor when the system froze. Cursor blinking, dashboard locked, module stuck in a silent loop. On screen, data validation timeout. Rerun recommended. He reran. It failed again. They assumed it was local latency, maybe a network hiccup, maybe the test environment needed a reboot. By mid-morning, 2 more sandboxed instances threw the same error, this time during a drone calibration test out in Nevada. That one was worse. The drone, running our stability protocols in a closed airspace loop, stalled mid-rotation and dropped 10 feet before recovery kicked in. No damage, but it rattled the observers. Armitage sent out a quiet memo recommending all demo trials be switched to static walkthrough only until further QA review. QA review wasn't going to help. The heartbeat token was gone. Nothing behind those flashy dashboards could authenticate against the original logic layer. My telemetry node, still woven into every module, had stopped calling home. I'd watched the logs over the weekend. Bit by bit, each sandbox registered the loss of upstream validation. Not a crash, not a shutdown, just friction. The kind that makes people nervous, the kind that makes smart engineers start asking, who's maintaining this anyway? That's exactly what happened by Monday evening. Procurement flagged the inconsistency in a performance review email. They'd noticed that the sandbox-to-sandbox replication data wasn't matching baseline behavior. Compliance bounced the inquiry back with a one-liner. Looping in legal, please confirm IP chain of custody prior to escalation. That sentence? That's how the wheels start to come off. Legal started reviewing contributor agreements. At first, they didn't see it. Clause 14C was buried beneath 3 signature pages masked by identical formatting in a contract executed during a prior system version. It took them a few hours to cross-reference signatures. When they did, everything stopped. At 3:42 p.m., Alyssa received the internal notification. The subject line was sterile. Attribution audit initiated. Vector Nav OS. Effective immediately, all active uses of Vector Nav OS, internal and demo environments are suspended pending IP attribution review. Please coordinate with compliance for interim protocol. The platform hadn't crashed. No user-facing alarm sounded. To anyone outside the system, it looked like a lull in traffic. But inside? Silence. Locked UI dashboards. Disabled sandbox syncing. Metrics dashboards with redacted fields and placeholder messages where real data used to be. It didn't take long for the questions to trickle upward. Who authorized the deployment? Where is the original codebase? Who wrote the telemetry logic? Why wasn't this flagged in the integration review? Why is the legal signature on the attribution clause not matching current leadership? Alyssa didn't have answers, because for 3 years she hadn't asked questions. She'd inherited a system she didn't build, branded it like luggage, and paraded it through every investor meeting like it was her signature work. Now she was locked out of the thing she claimed to own, and she still hadn't figured out who turned the key. But she would. Soon. The call came just after noon on Tuesday. Blocked number, military tone. I knew before I answered. Brigadier Meeks, the voice said. No pleasantries. I'm told your system's underlying framework is now in question. I didn't flinch. Only the attribution, sir. There was a pause, not defensive, just measuring. He continued. Our contractors are reporting module lockouts, telemetry desyncs, and sandbox regressions. Your name's come up. You filed a reversion clause enforcement? Yes, I said, pulling up the documents folder as I spoke. Clause 14C was triggered following public misattribution by an internal Armitage representative during a formal recognition event. The IP in question was developed under my LLC Catalyst Orion and registered through a dormant holding structure, Helion Vector Systems, with provisional patent applications filed in 2022 and 2023. I said it all calmly, like I was reading a grocery list. He didn't ask how Alyssa fit in, didn't mention her name. That's what told me everything I needed to know. Send what you have, he said. Time-stamped, notarized, signed. We're escalating to the directorate. Within minutes, I had the email out the door. Subject? Attribution chain documentation, VectorNav OS attachments, contributor, contract, catalyst orion.pdf, clause 14 SciC, initialed addendum.pdf, IP chain validation, ledger.xlsx, patent provisional Helion Vector 2022, PDF system architecture R3 v3.0 signed, PNG origin commit prag log catalyst root.json. I CC'd no one, not legal, not HR, not Armitage compliance, because I wasn't part of that chain anymore. The system they were scrambling to control was already unspooling, out of their hands, out of their servers, and now out of their hierarchy. A half hour later, my phone buzzed again. Same voice, Brigadier Meeks. Fewer words this time. I've reviewed the documents, he said. No discrepancies. Appreciated. One question remains, he continued. Who on your side has clearance to explain this to my directorate? I already knew he wasn't asking about Armitage. He'd seen the license reversion, the chain of custody, the triggers. He wasn't interested in who stood on stage. He wanted the one who built the foundation. So I gave him a name, my own, followed by designation, independent technical architect, clearance, active, affiliated entity, Vector Frame Systems. He didn't push. Didn't blink. Understood, he said. Expect further contact from Director Lunda's office. You'll be briefed. Then the line went dead. I stared at the call log for a moment. The silence afterward felt different. Not empty, just recalibrated. Like the room had changed shape without a sound. Outside, Armitage was still scrambling, legal panicking, engineers locked out of systems they thought were theirs. Alyssa no doubt pacing in some high-rise conference room, wondering why her phone had gone quiet and her access revoked. But here? Here, the dotted line had moved, and my name was finally on it. It started with a resignation email from Mason Wu, lead integration engineer, backbone of every field trial since 2022. His message was short. No complaints, no finger pointing, just 3 lines. Effective immediately. I am no longer confident in the IP governance of this project. Please direct future inquiries to my counsel. Then came Devika. Then Kaylee. By Friday, 3 engineers, 2 legal analysts, 1 technical writer, the procurement liaison, and, most damning of all, Samir Rana, the original co-contributor on the Sandbox module, had all walked. No press release, no HR memo, just vanishing names in the company directory and desk chairs left pulled slightly askew. By the time the CTO showed up unannounced to the floor, the project war room had turned into a ghost zone. The dashboard that once ran full-stack telemetry diagnostics across 3 DoD vendor sites had one message now, plastered in stark gray at the top of every panel. System status, pending audit lockout, attribution under review, module interactivity suspended. Data stopped flowing. Sensor hooks sat idle. Even the UI controls, the parts Alyssa used to demonstrate with sweeping hand gestures, were grayed out, mouse cursors spinning endlessly over dead controls. No one had hard crashed it. I hadn't touched a thing since revoking the token. But the system had rules, and one of them was no valid attribution, no active license. Someone had finally read the contract. When the CTO stormed in, his eyes landed on Alyssa like she'd personally sabotaged the Pentagon. Why the hell am I hearing about a usage freeze from a contractor instead of you? He barked, voice slicing the room in half. She stood by the console, white-knuckling her phone, still trying to unlock a dashboard that now only mirrored a blank schema. I thought legal had cleared it, she stammered. It was a team effort. A team He snapped. Whose name is on the funding proposal? Who spoke at Armitage? Who called it your architecture? Silence. Not one engineer spoke up. The room that used to echo with debugging banter and deadline adrenaline was still. No one backed her, because no one could afford to anymore. The CTO flipped open a tablet, pulled up the internal audit status, and scrolled through the latest. His jaw tensed. A clause ID was highlighted in red, 14C. Next to it, a timestamp. Under that, trigger acknowledged, reversion in process. Primary architect, Catalyst Orion, Helion Vector Systems. He looked back at Alyssa. You've been demoing a system we don't legally control. No, she whispered, almost pleading. It was collaborative. She worked on it, yes, but I managed the... No one's asking about who managed people, Alyssa, he cut in. We're asking who authored the system. She opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. Downstairs, IT had already disabled her access to the architecture logs. Upstairs, legal had started isolating communications for discovery. And somewhere across town, our government liaison was preparing for a directorate-level call that wouldn't include her name. There wasn't going to be a hearing. There wasn't going to be a chance to defend her version of the story, because the paper trail didn't care who looked the part. It only cared about who left the fingerprints, and mine were on every line of code. Alyssa Greer hadn't just lost a system. She'd lost the one thing corporate ambition can't fake: proof. I didn't return to Armitage, never once considered it. There was no apology that would have mattered, no corridor walk back that could unwrite the fine print they'd ignored. They had chosen the spotlight over substance, and now the lights were off and the substance had left the building. So I pivoted. I registered Vector Frame Systems the same week Alyssa's project was put on indefinite hold. Not as some revenge startup, not a vanity play, but a focused, hardened private research entity. No press releases, no social media, just a one-page site with a secure contact form and a list of protocol certifications only government labs would recognize. Within 10 days, the agency sent over a direct engagement contract, research advisory, renewable quarterly, with discretionary funding on prototype development and systems integration. No middle layers, no managers to navigate, just clean scope, secure channels, and one line in the agreement that made it all feel real. Lead technical architect, redacted, acting under Vector Frame Systems. Every time I read that line, it felt like the air cleared. My email inbox slowly shifted. The usual noise, industry newsletters, HR bulletins, junk vendor pitches fell away. In their place came encrypted messages from DoD subcontractors asking if I could help diagnose persistent telemetry drift in their validation environments. Some I knew by name. Others I'd only heard of in passing, black badge outfits that never responded to cold calls and didn't exist on LinkedIn. They didn't ask about Armitage. They didn't have to. I responded when I wanted, took the projects that aligned with what I wanted to build, and the rest I ignored. My silence was my boundary, and then the requests got personal. Hey, one message began. I don't know if you remember me. Kaylee from Systems QA I left last week. If you're building something new, I'd love to talk. 2 days later, another. Rana here. I walked too. You hiring? Then Devika, Mason, even one of the legal analysts who'd quit mid-review. They didn't want perks. They didn't ask for titles. They just wanted in. And I was hiring, but not loudly. I didn't want resumes. I wanted memory. People who remembered what it felt like to build without a stage. People who didn't need to be the face of anything, just the spine. The first team meeting was 5 people, held in a rented co-op conference room in a part of town where no one looked twice at quiet startups. We didn't bring laptops. We didn't even write much down, just talked about what had happened, about what we wanted to build now, about how attribution shouldn't require war. Someone asked what our org chart would look like. I said we'd figure it out. For now, there was only one thing that mattered: control. Control of our work, control of our names, control of the contracts we signed. There was no champagne, no keynote, no LinkedIn post, just 5 people, 1 locked door, and a quiet sense of motion. Forward. 6 weeks later, the mahogany-paneled conference room at Langford Defense Labs smelled like cold coffee and old paper, real strategy air, the kind that hadn't been disrupted by buzzwords or branding decks. The roundtable was invite only. No recordings, no live stream, just the kind of meeting where policies shift and funding finds new homes. Security was tight. My credentials cleared 3 checkpoints. When I entered, a printed nameplate already waited for me. Technical Advisor Vector Frame Systems. I sat without fanfare. The seats filled gradually. Analysts from field offices, engineers from subcontractors, 2 compliance officers. And there, across the long expanse of polished wood, Alyssa Greer. I registered her presence like you'd note a street lamp flickering in daylight, acknowledged but irrelevant. She looked not broken, just empty. Pale skin, rigid posture. The branded scarf she used to drape around her shoulders like a tech world badge of honor was gone, replaced by a navy blazer a size too stiff. Her hands stayed folded. No tablet, no notes. When the facilitator called the session to order, she flinched at the sound. The agenda was simple. System resilience protocols for autonomous coordination across defense supply chains. Everyone at the table had touched some piece of the larger system in the last 18 months. Everyone had questions, and only a few of us had answers. I was the third to speak. Let's start with a telemetry root logic, I said calmly, clicking to slide one of the diagrams I'd built that week. The issue is not redundancy, it's verification. Layering fallback protocols without real-time validation creates false resilience. What we need is adaptive telemetry with adaptive licensing, modular control frameworks that adjust to field conditions without triggering rollback failures. The silence was focused. Even the guy from Boulder, who usually interrupted everyone, was scribbling notes. I walked through the roadmap we'd built at VectorFrame, showed the time-stamped module specs. Not theoretical, not pitchware, just clean frameworks, real output, and a licensing model built to survive what the previous system hadn't: misuse, misattribution, and executive overreach. A colonel from the directorate asked how we'd prevent single-point credential failure in the next build. Private escrow-based signature validation, I said, flipping to the last slide. You want resilience? Stop building on trust and start building on proof. No one looked at Alyssa. No one needed to. She was no longer a participant. She was a placeholder, a ghost at the table where architects now sat. When it came time for her to speak during her assigned 5-minute window, she passed. I'll defer to the current technical lead, she said quietly, voice brittle. I didn't react. Not out of cruelty, but because the work mattered more. By the end of the session, 3 agencies had requested follow-ups with VectorFrame. One had already sent over encrypted credentials to begin secure protocol review. Another asked for a budget proposal by the end of the month. When I gathered my materials and stood to leave, the facilitator nodded with quiet respect. Not fanfare, not applause, just recognition. I didn't look back as I walked out. There was nothing behind me worth revisiting. It was a Wednesday. Quiet one. I was elbows deep reviewing version 2.1 of our resilience protocol for next-gen signal hopping. Nothing glamorous, just fine-tuning delay thresholds between autonomous nodes. The kind of work that doesn't make headlines, but keeps machines from drifting into errors that kill missions. Then, an email hit my inbox from Devika, subject line, "Well, this aged poorly." Attached was a screen cap of a webinar promo, live webinar, Team Leadership in Tech Environments, featuring Alyssa Greer, Strategic Innovation Executive. The photo was old, too old. A filtered headshot from the Armitage days, back when she was being paraded as the visionary behind VectorNav. Her expression held that forced warmth you learn from press kits, the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. I clicked the link out of curiosity, not interest. The landing page was standard. Company logo, bold serif font, and a promo line that read like satire now. Join Alyssa Greer as she shares lessons on technical team leadership, innovation under pressure, and how to bring complex systems from idea to deployment. I almost closed the tab until I saw the comments section. One reply. No likes, no emojis. Just a line from someone named Rana 3Fartian. Maybe start by inviting the people who actually built your system. That was it. No retort, no deletion, no reply from Alyssa, just silence. The kind that doesn't echo, it settles. I stared at it longer than I should have, not because I was angry. That had burned off long ago. but because for once the truth didn't have to shout. It didn't need a press tour or a rebrand. It just sat there, unbothered, complete. Vector Frame was beyond steady by then. We'd filed 3 patents, signed 2 new multi-agency contracts, and quietly established a framework standard we never marketed. We just let performance speak. Clients didn't care about noise. They cared about systems that worked, people who delivered, papers that proved origin. I never brought Alyssa's name up to anyone, not in meetings, not in interviews, not even when contractors whispered about the mess over at Armitage, like it was urban legend. Because that wasn't my story anymore. She could hold her webinars. I held the license, and every time her name got brought up in the wrong room, someone would inevitably pull up the documentation, the logs, the clause, the contract trail, and realize exactly who'd built the foundation she tried to stand on. She thought she was blocking a technician. She was locking out the architect.